anyone entering the UK illegally, as well as those who have arrived illegally since January the 1st, may now be relocated to Rwanda.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. Today we're looking at an extraordinary story out of the United Kingdom. The British government's plans to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda. The first flight, with just a handful of people on board, was supposed to take off on Tuesday, but it was stopped at the last minute by the European Court of Human Rights for several reasons, including doubts over migrants' legal rights and their safety once in Rwanda. Well, the UK government was pretty angry about the court's intervention and remains determined to continue with the Rwanda plan. So will Boris Johnson now pull the UK out of the European Convention on Human Rights? Didn't rule it out.
Will it be necessary to change some laws to help us as we go along? It may very well be, and all these options are under constant review.
Meanwhile, Britain's Home Secretary, Freddie Patel, who's been pushing for this plan, has said she's disappointed but determined to carry on.
This government will not be deterred from doing the right thing. We will not be put off by the inevitable legal last-minute challenges, nor we will allow mobs, Madam Deputy Speaker, to block removals.
Well, no matter how you look at it, the European Court has dealt a blow to the British Prime Minister, who announced the Rwanda plan about 2 months ago and has been trying to sell it ever since.
The deal we've done is uncapped, and Rwanda will have the capacity to resettle tens of thousands of people in the years ahead. The migration and economic partnership is something that we agreed with Rwanda. It's a great deal between two countries, to each helping the other. What we're trying to do is stop the business model of criminal gangs who are preying on people, moving them across the channel in unseaworthy vessels, risking their lives and sometimes costing their lives.
Freddie Patel's also been selling the plan. In fact, it was Patel who flew to Rwanda to seal the deal with politicians there.
The global approach to asylum and migration is broken. Evil people smugglers and their criminal gangs are facilitating people into Europe, resulting in the loss of life.
By relocating migrants to Rwanda, investing in their personal development and providing education, employment and other opportunities, we are giving them the chance to make new lives in our country as full members of our communities.
Now, I keep saying the British government is trying to sell the deal because it is somewhat controversial and divisive. Some polls, like this one conducted for the Conservative Daily Mail newspaper, suggest the British public is 2-1 in favour of the plan. But other polls, like this one carried out by YouGov, suggest a majority are against it. Media coverage is similarly divided. Right-of-centre papers like The Express have tended to be in favour of the plan, with headlines like PM bold plan to send boat migrants to Rwanda, whereas more left-leaning newspapers like The Guardian have run headlines and articles like this one: I will die here, I can't go back to Africa. Public figures have also been speaking out on both sides. Here's Mr Brexit himself, Nigel Farage, who has a show on the Conservative GB News network.
One upside is to show the country that something is being done. The other upside is it may well act as a disincentive for people to pay 3,000, 5,000 euros to a trafficker if they think they're going to finish up in Rwanda.
Well, we also have the British Conservative political commentator Calvin Robinson, who also believes in the benefit of the Rwanda plan.
Do you think Jesus would be pro the Rwanda thing?
Absolutely. You know why? We know why? Yes, absolutely. Because people are crossing the channel illegally and dangerously with people smugglers and potentially at risk of death, when there's no need for that at all. And what we can do is process their asylum claims in a safe country where they'll be welcomed.
Let's take a look at the other side of the debate now. We have people like the actress Emma Thompson.
The Rwanda scheme is sort of eye-wateringly mad and callous.
Then there's Ash Sakar, a senior editor at the left-wing outlet Novara Media.
It is not supposed to be a policy which is economically sensible. It's not supposed to be one which can withstand individual appeals by individual asylum seekers. And it's certainly not supposed to do anything like help regularize the means by which asylum seekers come to this country. It is fundamentally intended as a form of spectacle and cruelty.
Even Prince Charles has apparently weighed in, even though he's not supposed to get involved in politics, reportedly calling the policy appalling. As you'd expect, there was a backlash, with some newspapers calling on the prince to keep his nose out of politics.
It's a silly and foolish comment to make by the future king, if indeed he did so. It's foolish on the first hand because everybody has appreciated the Queen over her reign for the way that she stepped outside of politics. She's tried to bring the nation together. She hasn't been seen to be supporting one side or another. And for the future king to do this will actually start to alienate many of those who are traditional supporters of the royal family.
Meanwhile, the leaders of the Church of England have openly opposed the government. In a letter to the Times signed by every bishop in the House of Lords, they call the Rwanda plan immoral and say the policy should shame us as a nation. The most senior name on that letter, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, had already made that point in his Easter sermon when he said the plan, quote, cannot stand up to the judgment of God.
Subcontracting out our responsibilities, even to a country that seeks to do well, like Rwanda, is the opposite of the nature of God, who himself took responsibility for our failures.
Well, as you'd expect, there was a backlash against the archbishops too. Here's Mr. Farage once more.
He didn't mention anything about the criminal traffickers. He didn't mention anything about the drownings in the Channel. He didn't mention anything about those that come into this country and finish up effectively working in slave labour conditions. No, he's not interested in any of that. It's all about the big virtue signal.
Farage wasn't the only one to criticise the Archbishop. One online paper put it this way: the government's Rwanda policy is no longer about who is allowed to come to this country, it's about who runs this country. Is it Boris Johnson's government, which was elected by just shy of 14 million citizens, or is it the heir to the throne and the Archbishop of Canterbury and the House of Lords and those human rights lawyers who seem to spend their every waking hour bristling against democratic legislation, none of whom has ever won a single vote from us? In my view, it should be the former, the people we voted into power. Of course, it's not just human rights lawyers and public figures who have been speaking out against the Rwanda plan. There have also been a number of small demonstrations.
Refugees are welcome here!
We sent our producer down to Gatwick Airport over the weekend, where more than 100 people were protesting quite close to an immigration removal centre, which is just around the corner. And here's what some of the protesters had to say.
People's right to seek asylum, people's right to due process is not being respected. This is something that the Home Office does and has been doing for years. They refuse to let people see lawyers, or they fail to let them see translators. They illegally seize people's possessions. We've seen time and time again that the conditions inside immigration removal centres are atrocious.
The standards of living for every single person in this country are being attacked, and they need to divert people's attention from unifying in their own interests and instead dividing people on questions like, do we deport people to Rwanda? It's absolutely a political play.
To suggest that we should be deterring people seeking asylum is just completely ridiculous. We are one of the richest countries in the world. We have a really long history of being responsible for a lot of atrocities, and we just need to do our bit.
As Christians, we believe in a just and fair asylum and migration system, and so we think that people have a right to be heard, they have a right to safety, and those people who are fleeing warfare and prosecution have the right to be treated with dignity.
Now, the British government says it came up with the Rwanda option to deter people from trying to enter the UK illegally, often using people smugglers who either get them across the English Channel in boats or in the back of lorries. Both methods are potentially dangerous. Last year, more than 28,000 people are known to have crossed in small boats, well up from 2020, when 8,404 people did the same. This year, nearly 10,000 people have already arrived in the UK on small boats, and according to Border Force Union officials, the figure will go up to 60,000 by the end of this year. As that figure goes up, so too will probably the number of drownings. Contrast that with the Eurotunnel route, which in recent years has become much harder for people smugglers. Mind you, cast your mind back to 2015, and Eurotunnel managed to intercept 37,000 migrants. Remember, there was that awful case in 2019 when 39 people from Vietnam suffocated in the back of a refrigerator lorry.
Hắn thảm lắm quá, hắn mới chờ ít người thì có lẽ hắn không bị nữa.
Well, this Rwanda policy is aimed at preventing such tragedies, but will it work? Here's the basics of the plan. The UK government will pay £120 million, or about $145 million, into Rwanda's Economic Development Fund, and it will pay the costs of relocating the migrants, estimated to be around $35,000 per person. Rwanda has stipulated it won't accept anyone with a criminal record, but it has promised to give successful applicants a dignified life and invest in their integration into Rwandan society. Refugee charities say threatening to send illegal immigrants to Rwanda is not the way to prevent such things from happening again. And they say they have grave doubts about Rwanda's human rights record. However, the Rwandan government says it is capable of handling asylum seekers.
Rwanda has had long experience in receiving refugees from our region. For the last 25 years, after the tragedy that happened here in '94, we have over 130,000 refugees here from our region that live amongst us in refugee camps, in our cities. Rwanda is a very safe, welcoming country.
Now, it's important to note that the Rwanda deportation plan does not apply to people who have entered the UK by the proper channels. In the past year alone, the UK government estimates it's given sanctuary to over 97,000 people from Hong Kong, over 13,000 Afghans, and that more than 50,000 have been granted visas under the Family and Homes for Ukraine schemes. Repeat, this policy won't affect people like them. It'll affect illegal migrants. And according to Migration Watch, at least 75,600 people have entered the country without permission by boat and lorry since 2018. The plan would apply to people like them, but only if they're deemed inadmissible to the UK's asylum system, and only a tiny fraction are deemed such. Interesting footnote about Boris Johnson. You'll often hear his critics calling him a racist. But just look at his cabinet. 26%, or 1 in 4 cabinet ministers, are from an ethnic minority background. That is actually double what you'll find in the British population. Interestingly, Freddie Patel's family came to the UK from Uganda in the 1960s, not long before Uganda's leader, Idi Amin, threw all Asians out of his country. Coincidentally, Uganda borders Rwanda, and they're both about 7,000 kilometres away from the UK. Of course, Freddie Patel's critics have used her background against her, saying she, of all people, should be more understanding. One charity leader in Britain who was born in Uganda, Fiaz Mughal, wrote in The Guardian that Freddie Patel is also of Ugandan Asian heritage. It's despicable that she is sending today's desperate refugees to Rwanda. Then there's Britain's Education Minister Nadeem Zahawi, who fled to the UK from Saddam Hussein's Iraq with his family when he was just 9 years old. Here he is being quizzed on Sky News.
How do you think you would have fared if you'd been put on a plane and sent to Rwanda?
Actually, the legal routes are the way forward. If those people have arrived in a safe country in France, my family fled directly from Iraq to a safe country, which is the United Kingdom, and I'm very proud of that. But to actually try and conflate or argue that actually we're somehow not proud of our record on whether it's immigration or asylum and refuge for the people that really are in most need, then I'm afraid I respectfully disagree with you.
OK, let's bring in our guests now, and we have two contributors with very different perspectives. Rakib Ehsan is an independent senior policy analyst, and he wrote an article in the Daily Mail entitled "So-Called Human Rights Activists Are Putting Lives of Migrants at Risk." And we also have Michela Wrong, who is a very experienced journalist who has reported on East Africa for many years and has written several books on the continent. Welcome to both of you. Michela, your reaction first to the European Court of Human Rights putting a stop to that flight to Rwanda, which you opposed all along.
Yeah, well, it was all extremely dramatic. It all happened at the very last moment. But I must admit that it wasn't really unanticipated. Ever since Freddie Patel announced that she had signed this deal with President Paul Kagame of Rwanda, I never believed that it would go through smoothly. It's clearly got all sorts of legal issues. I mean, the UNHCR has made its position clear on this deal and said it simply isn't legal. And even in the Conservative Party, we have seen some very prominent MPs who have been saying, Jesse Norman, for example, who's been saying this is an ugly deal. It's almost certainly illegal, and it's likely to be counterproductive. So the fact that suddenly you got all these the last-minute hurdles was not unexpected. I think my question was, why was Priti Patel in such a rush? Because, why not wait for this policy to be properly debated in the British Parliament? Why not wait for the judicial review process to examine it? All of those would have seemed sensible steps instead of rushing it through and then seeing it bolt at the last moment.
Yeah, Rakib, Ehsan, pick up on that point. Why did she rush it through? And what do you make of the ECHR's decision to ground the flight?
Well, I think that firstly, the outcome last night wasn't a surprise for me. The fact that the flight, the deportation flight to Rwanda was grounded following those last-minute legal appeals. I suspect that the government may see it as some sort of win. Essentially, they can portray this entire episode as a foreign court intervening in the policies of a democratically elected government when it comes to its efforts in terms of combating illegal immigration and reforming a currently dysfunctional asylum system.
In your article, you said, by fighting the government at every step, these self-righteous and sneering so-called human rights activists put the lives of the most vulnerable at risk. So you see this outcome as actually very negative.
Well, I think that, in my view, Matthew, we have a dysfunctional asylum system which very much functions on survival of the fittest. From what I can see when it comes to illegal immigration, we see largely single, able-bodied young men who are being illegally imported by people smuggling enterprises. When I want to see a radically streamlined asylum system which prioritises particular groups, including women and young girls who are at serious risk of sexual violence in their homelands, and ethnic and religious minorities who are at serious risk of political persecution, at the moment we do not have a streamlined asylum system which is well ordered.
Mm-hmm. Michela, would you say that you fell into that category of the self-righteous and sneering so-called human rights activists? You're very misguided, according to Rakib.
Well, I mean, my take is somewhat different. But I agree that asylum policy is broke and needs to be reformed root and branch. I mean, I don't know if you do agree with that, but I think that it's not working. I mean, we know that. My issue is with the choice of destination. Of all the countries in Africa that you might want to send refugees to, if you accept the principle of an offshore processing arrangement, Rwanda's the worst one to send to. It's got a very dodgy human rights record of its own. It's also massively overpopulated as a country. It's a tiny country, very densely populated. There's not much spare land to go around. I don't see how any of these asylum seekers will find jobs once they're there.
Rwanda says they will offer the migrants a dignified life and will spend and invest in incorporating them into the wider Rwandan society.
Well, yes, they may say that. Whether they can do that, given that they already have an overload of refugees themselves. They've got 130,000 refugees living in tented camps who don't seem to have been successfully integrated in Rwandan society and found jobs and been able to set up their own farms, because there are an awful lot of them. It's a very small country. So Rwanda can say that. Whether it can deliver that, I very much doubt.
Rakib, in your article, you said that the left, when they run down Rwanda as a possible destination, are betraying a deep and racist bigotry, dismissing Rwanda as a barely civilized backwater.
Well, I mean, firstly, I have to defer to Michela's expertise, considering she's actually written a book specifically focused on Rwanda. But I think there are people who don't know very much about Rwanda at all, who are depicting as some kind of post-apocalyptic hellscape, where, while I certainly wouldn't describe it to be an oasis of liberal democracy, I do think that Michela would somewhat agree that it has made notable forms of economic and political progress since the 1994 civil war, which descended into full-blown genocide. To my understanding, the Rwandan legislature has the highest rate of female participation. Women play an integral part in both Rwanda's public and private sectors, and they're playing their part in helping Rwanda towards its aspirations in terms of becoming a middle-income country by 2035 and a high-income country by 2050. And I guess that the UK saw Rwanda as a convenient partner because it's a relatively new member of the Commonwealth that is perhaps eager to impress the UK. So if Rwanda does not fulfill its obligations in terms of this partnership, then that could strain its strategic relations with the UK. in the future.
Yeah. Michela?
Yeah, I think those are all fair enough, fair comments. Firstly, I would say, though, Rwanda is always vaunting and sort of showing off its amazing development statistics. And the problem is Rwanda is basically a dictatorship, a police state. And in police states and dictatorships, statistics for economic growth and election results, for example, they're always really suspect. And I have huge question marks about a lot of the wonderful figures you see coming out of Rwanda. It's definitely a well-ordered society.
I think perhaps that's the intention of the British government, isn't it? To shock and scare would-be migrants. After all, they haven't made the deal with Switzerland, have they? I mean, the intention is to say to the people smugglers and to the people who pay the people smugglers to get them across the channel, if you come here, there's a chance you could end up in Rwanda. And it's supposed to be a threat, surely. And the point is, the British government's first duty is to the British people and to prevent illegal immigration. And that's what they've tried to do. Has it worked? It's been, 2 months now, this announcement. Is there any evidence that it's worked so far?
I don't think there is. I mean, we've seen a constant flood of people crossing the channel since the deal was announced. So far it hasn't worked. Whether it will work long term, we will see.
Rakib?
In my view, that this current government, there's a real gap between the rhetoric and the reality when it comes to tackling illegal immigration. There continue to be illegal channel crossings. And I do think the UK government, while it can portray last night's episode as some kind of win, the reality of the matter is, if the current Conservative government deliberately increases the salience of illegal immigration and a broken asylum system as critical issues in the minds of the British voter, eventually, Matthew, they have to deliver. Because if you increase the salience but you don't deliver on the policy itself, they could find themselves in very choppy electoral waters.
Michela, earlier in the programme, we heard from a gentleman who wrote for Spiked. He said, who runs the country is what this has become about now. Is it the heir to the throne? Is it the House of Lords? Is it the human rights activists and the lawyers? Is it the European Court on Human Rights? Or the British government, which was voted for by 14 million plus people? Is it a question of democracy, the will of democracy being carried out here? Was
it necessary to go for this kind of flamboyant, shocking policy? I would have argued that it would have. I'm astonished by the fact that there's not better policing of the coastline. We constantly see these boats arriving, but you sort of think, well, surely, with the helicopters that are constantly buzzing along the coast, could they not work out who is sending those boats over?
Is it the lack of French cooperation that's really the problem?
Well, that's the other issue I was going to raise. Andrew Mitchell, I disagree with him on many points on Rwanda, but he has said we need to start getting on better terms with France because, if you haven't got the French on board, you're never going to be able to police your coastline. And receiving all these people and then jetting them 4,000 kilometres to Africa, huge expense to the British taxpayer. I don't think the taxpayers can be grateful for the fact, for example, that flight, was paid for and didn't take off. And
right. Something like £500,000, some say.
Yeah, a very expensive gesture when all sorts of domestic methods could have been used to sort of try and deal with gangs instead of constantly, talking about them, but never actually dealing with them. And to get on better terms with Europe and get on better terms with the French.
The British government say this isn't over. This legal hurdle is just the latest hurdle and they'll get over it, and that thousands will be deported to Rwanda, and the plans are being made now for the next flight. Do you think, it's a guess really, Michela, but do you think the government will get its way on this, or will it completely come to a halt because of the legal concerns?
I wouldn't be surprised if we see some asylum seekers being sent to Kigali. I mean, now Rwanda's very invested in this and they want to show the world that they've got these hostels ready. They've been showing the camera crews around them for ages, and they're these cute little hostels. I would be happy to stay in them. And, it's a safe place to send refugees. They want to send out that message. So I think we will see some people going. But the idea that this is a solution, I think, we've gone from tens of thousands that we were promised that would be sent over there. Then it became, single figures. Then it was zero. I believe now that we seem to be talking about possibly hundreds. This isn't going to be a solution unless there is a really strong deterrent effect, and we haven't seen the deterrent effect kicking in so far.
Rakib, what's your guess? We've nearly run out of time.
Well, I think in my view, whatever term you want to use, hell-bent or determined, I think the government is going to run with this policy. It's heavily politically invested in the UK-Rwanda partnership. But as I said, it's ultimately a matter of delivery. The Conservative government can only blame lefty lawyers and the human rights industry for so long. Eventually they have to deliver on the numbers, and they have to show that whatever policies they are implementing, that is ultimately leading to a more secure border security system for the UK.
Rakib, Ehsan, Michela Wrong, thank you so much for your contributions to the Nexus today. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.